So let us know what is the single most essential, top tier attribute according to you for a better future. What is that single most requirement for a good, better future? Whatever is it that you want. We've got moderators, Mr. Sandy, our IT development leader, Astrido Group. Mr. Sandy, what would your answer be? Not pertaining to IT, not pertaining to work, just in life. What would you say is that single most attribute for a better tomorrow? I believe you are on mute. Mr. Sandy, you seem to be on mute. This is the only thing I hate about work from home. Rest, everything is fine. Yes, Mr. Sandy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Sandy, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Nikita. I think it is about our willingness to learn and to fight.
Fantastic answer, Mr. Sandy. Fantastic. And by the way, of course, moderator is Mr. Sandy, the man with the toughest job. I always say moderator has the toughest job. And moving on to our speakers. Our first speaker is Mr. Raju, Bhupatiraju, VP Sales and GM APAC and Middle East, Acceldata. Mr. Raju, what would your answer be?
As in single most important thing?
Just one.
That's a tough one, but I mean, I think seeing things for what they are and doing what you got to do is central to what we do, I guess.
Wow. The only reason I ask, right, I get that all of you are IT gurus and leaders. The reason why I keep asking life advice is because I truly need them. And from your vast experience, if we can learn more, that would be a privilege. All right, moving on to our next speaker. Thank you so much, Mr. Raju. Our next speaker is Ms. Lim May Ann, Emeritus Director, Asia Cloud Computing Association Director, Fairtech Institute. Ms. May, what would your answer be?
What's the question again?
The question is, what according to you is that one life skill, the most important life skill? Just one answer.
Adaptability.
Sorry? Ms. May, I believe you are on mute.
Adaptability.
Fantastic answer. And on that note, leaders, stage is all yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Nikita. Hello and welcome to our session, Cloud Computing. Thank you for having me. Now, we have some questions for Ms. Lim. Ms. Lim, when the company starts, typically it has small size and number of systems. As it grows, the business processes change and grow. The management probably add new systems which may or may not connect to each other or even compatible to each other. How can cloud adoption help companies, especially in Southeast Asia, in this matter?
Thanks for that question. So let me start by doing a really quick introduction of myself. I am the Emeritus Director of the Asia Cloud Computing Association, and I welcome everybody who is online. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I've been working at the ACCA for the last 10 years, and it's been quite an interesting journey to see people move on to the cloud. And the question about, hey, we've got lots of companies who are looking into incompatible systems. So what's really, really important? I'm going to share my screen and just show you a couple of slides just to run through really quickly. And Raju, please feel free to question me on some of these slides as well, as with Sandy. A lot of times the core question really is, where do you start? Because you've got all of these various systems. You need to start with mapping first. You really need to start mapping where you are, and then you need to start mapping where you want to get to. So in this case, can you see, oh my goodness, I've got all of these slides. I'm not going to go to full screen because it's hard to navigate on full screen. But I think you can see, if you're in manufacturing, you've got many, many things that you need to juggle, and you need to know where everything is before you start shifting. And to come back to Sandy's question, what do you need to integrate? Because if you have order information, for example, whether it's for inventory or whether it's for parts, and it's on one system, and then your shipping instructions are in another system, you need to know that already. So I've got a whole bunch of slides that I can share with you on, for example, the manufacturing electronic enterprise systems and how you can be managing stuff like that. I've also got an example of Korea to share with you, but let me skip over right to the end where I have some supporting slides. What do you need to map out? Firstly, you need to map out your ER diagrams, all of your enterprise resources, and you need to map out what the processes are. That's actually where you see the connections in the first instance to, hey, what kind of systems there are to integrate. And then after that, you need to see which departments need to talk to each other. That's your swim lane examples. In between departments, maybe some processes need to go to the workshop floor, some processes need to go to accounting, and you need to move up and down. You need to know who needs to talk to who about the same thing. And then after that, you start to design your databases. I'll stop here because I think that that's a lot of diagrams to show people already. But to your question, Sandy, which is a great one, where do you start? You start by mapping out where you are, and then you start thinking and talking to your staff and to your, I guess, your vendor. Where do you want to get to? I'll stop there and hand the time back to you.
Thank you very much. It must be a very tedious job, but it is very important for the next step in it.
Was that a question to me? Is it a very tedious job? I'm going to say yes, it's a very tedious job.
Yes, I see. I got what you mean. Okay, now, Mr. Raju, in the last decade, we see more and more innovations in the world that are related to information technology. How can cloud technology facilitate innovation in manufacturing industry?
Thanks for that question, Sandy. So there's obviously ever-expanding universe of new products coming in, new technologies coming in, and manufacturing is, has been one of the early adopting vertical of cloud technologies, even though it meant just storing data on cloud, for example, cloud storage. Right? I remember 10 years ago, more than that, in fact, some of these companies that I used to run into, with many prospects, etc., that I used to talk, long before the rest of the industries have started talking about cloud, manufacturing was already putting data in the cloud, even if it meant pure storage. And what is the part of it? Manufacturing is not like a services company. Got a lot more machinery, there's logistics, there's products, there's shipping, all those kind of things included. And therefore, usually ripe for adopting some of these technologies when compared to organizations such as banks, for example, that are in a regulated industry. You got to get somebody's approval, that sort of a thing. So as a result, it's a very fertile territory. And as a result, if you're innovative and if you're looking forward to solve some of these problems, cloud provides a very quick fix. Why is that so? Because it's basically something that you can start immediately. So there's agility involved. You don't have to buy the stuff. You don't have to convince like 50 people to get to something. And then you scale it. So if you need something in the middle of a certain month or a certain year, you could still do it without worrying too much about it, just like how you use electricity. But then every technology comes with some blind spots, as we call it, because nobody has used it, so you don't know what goes into expanding those things. So there are many examples where organizations start using the cloud technologies for what it is promising, and then derive those promises, benefits out of those promises. But then they realize, hey, there was something else missing, or they didn't see something coming. So it's important, in order to expand any innovation using cloud, they're like the tools. You got the hammer, you got the plier, you got the screwdriver, and so on and so forth. But then you got to put some guardrails in order to make sure things are grown, fixed responsibly. For instance, just by putting things on cloud, you realize, hey, I can give everybody access, and everybody can use that to get their reports every hour instead of every week, for example, things like that. It can breed a separate behavior. That means then there's cost associated to it, and those mistakes can be really costly very quickly, within a month and 2 months, etc. So what's the way to do these sort of things? So I'd like to think of it like driving a car. So you built a car that you want to go fast with, but then along the way, there are these potholes and there's traffic and there's many other things. So you got to build, think of it like brakes, okay, wherever you want to stop quickly, or even shock absorbers, which can take the shocks, etc. Some sort of guardrails. So if you think of it, these things look like shock absorbers or wherever you can brake. But if you think one level deeper, both these are built to really allow you to drive faster. So you can stop if something comes in, and that brings an agility into the business. And then you also expand and contract because the car should not get bent or broken if it does not have good enough shocks. Both of them effectively allow you to move fast. So those guardrails are very important for every organization to do it. What are those things? Think of it in terms of people, process, and technology. If technology is too much too quickly, then you know that some people may not learn to run it that fast. There's enough technologies out there where they really think, hey, that particular product is a problem, but the reality is the people may not have been trained properly, possibly, right? So there is 3 elements: people, process, and technology. The process part of it will include different departments within an organization need to work together in order to make things work. That's what enterprises are all about. But then if the process doesn't allow some of these technologies to be leveraged, that becomes the bottleneck, and therefore you have to address that. So I would suggest that it's important to look at the technology part of it. Yes, it's available, but then complement that with the people part of it, the training part of it, and the skill part of it. And of course, the mindset to change and adapt to new technologies, like what Ms. May has said, adaptability is important. And then, of course, the process as a company, which means multiple departments and multiple KPIs, need to be aligned in a better manner. So as a result, that becomes, that takes the organization to the next orbit in their journey to make as much automation as possible and deliver the results they're looking for.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Mr. Raju. Now, current questions is for both. Current question is for both Ms. Lim and Mr. Raju. How to formulate the right cloud strategy to optimize manufacturing processes with company's business goal in mind?
Ms. May, would you like to go first?
Okay.
Sure. I found that it's actually it's a very important question. I think, Raju, you mentioned this as well, right? I mean, sometimes we want to put the cart before the horse. You say product, product, product. It's really important, and then we forget about the people. They're like, we don't know how to get there. And then they all just start joining the Great Resignation and they leave. And then you say, okay, this is terrible because you don't even have a business now if you don't have staff. So I think that's a really, really important question. And I'm in the middle of a very interesting project right now that's trying to provide a case for a particular industrial sector to move to the cloud. And the weird thing is that, and Raju, again, correct me if I'm wrong, the questions that I'm being asked of the investors, the people who want to lend the money, are that give us the ROI of moving to the cloud now, so that we know how to learn how to lend the money. We want to know the lending rate. We want to know the amortization, and we want to know the return on investment, so that we can charge the interest rate and we know how long to give the loan for. But here's the thing, and I'm going to show my slide because this is actually really important for us to understand that yes, while people, product, and processes are important, I think that one of the things which we need to remember is that actually it is important for us to understand the business process re-engineering, where you actually map out all of these changes and plan for movement to the cloud. It's really about optimization, not just to save money, but for innovation. So we've got to learn about how we can talk to people about multipliers and making the pie bigger, instead of if you spend this amount of money, you can save this amount of money. No. A lot of people will say, let's spend money so that we can make money. We spend money so that we can make the pie bigger. So when you're talking about moving to the cloud, the idea of like, oh, it's going to be a little bit difficult, for example, to change the way that we talk about how we're going to be investing in it, we need to start to learn how to talk about innovation and learn how to put figures to innovation, even though it's a little bit harder to predict, because after all, you say, if I give, remember a few years ago when mobile phones just came out and everybody was like, oh, if we give our employees mobile phones, they will be less productive. They will all start playing Candy Crush on their phones, and the return on the investment is no good. But a lot of times that innovation, we've not really come up to a way of counting for it. So I feel that a lot of times we need to learn how to talk to our staff, our people, our product, our processes, and talk about not just optimization, but what is the multiplier for innovation that could come, the benefits that would come if you are moving to the cloud. I'm going to go back to my slides again and let me show you what South Korea did when they started to go down the COVID tracking mechanism. They put in a lot of systems, and if you're thinking about return on investment for the government, I think that putting certain controls in place because of COVID-19 it's going to pay back in dividends, because they're going to be able to use the systems for many, many more things. So let me again share my slide and I'll show you that for South Korea. So what happened was that there was a epidemic investigation support system that needed to be put in place really, really quickly. So I know this is all in Korean, but let me give you the English bits and pieces. What they did was that they re-engineered everything. So you see that there were APIs that they put in. All of the vertical blue color lines are APIs. They have a semantics API, they have a data service API, and admin API, security API, and then various city hubs actually had they were put all into a gateway, and then they had City Hub gateway. So all of the applications started to connect in after they started to put this in for COVID. So COVID was the example that, or rather the excuse that they had, or to push this through. But the city management system suddenly came alive after that, because smart mobility, smart parking, smart safety, city administration, environmentalism, monitoring and evaluation, they all just started to explode after that. And it's really hard to say, hey, if you're looking at from a project management perspective, the ROI that you had needed to collect when you were talking, let us spend $5 million developing this city data hub and re-engineering the business processes for South Korea for the epidemic investigation support system. That ROI probably is just, okay, we'll need to measure the number of people who are sick, number of people who are not sick. But how are you going to measure, for example, the benefit to whole of country management, greening the city in Seoul? Seoul, by the way, just won, I think, best sustainable city based on some research. So you can imagine that this has paid back in extreme dividends, but it's not going to be easily managed from a project by project basis. So I'll stop here. Lots more to share about, you know, where South Korea did with all of their epidemic tracking systems. But I mean, it's really, really interesting to see that we're talking about you know, return on investments when we should actually be talking about multipliers gained from allowing more innovation from cloud. I'll stop there and I'll pass the time to maybe Raju if you want to augment some of the examples or refute some of the claims that I've made.
Not really. I think that's a very good example, and that's directionally accurate for every industry. In this case, you demonstrated a city, and it's you know, it's seeing a certain you know, COVID-related restrictions and so on, and how to come out of it. We can adapt the same thing to every other industry, including manufacturing. One thing it's very clear is that constraints breed innovation. Okay, so therefore, did COVID put that restriction? Sure, yes. Sometimes it's competition that puts in. Sometimes it's other market related impacts that induce these kind of constraints. So therefore, you got to look at the list of constraints that you want to overcome. And if somebody comes out with a solution, it's important to then figure out if they can be done in a low risk manner to start the adoption. meaning if there's, you have these telemetry information, you can capture any amount of telemetry information these days at a very high level of granularity. The trick lies in making it user-friendly when you connect the dots. How quickly can you do it, and how well aligned those stitched dashboards, for example, are to the individual doing that job. So therefore, when that happens, you could start with an A/B testing kind of a thing. Does this work? Can I test it out for a week, for a month, whatever that time is? And then if it is doing very well in the outside, then you can bring it into the production systems, into the maybe, if not core, maybe some other peripheral systems before you bring it into the production system, because then it gives you enough time for the learning curve on what works, what it is that you are not aware of, what are the blind spots, like I mentioned before. And once you know that, and then you have both the skill and the level of comfort required to use this, it can definitely go ahead. Believe me, today, if you have a constraint, somebody has already thought of that at some part of the world, and they've already created some solution for it. So it's easy to guess. And the good news, the fantastic news compared to even 10 years ago, is that there are likely to be half a dozen startups you'll find doing exactly that. And the good thing about half a dozen startups, or even more, for every problem is that they're going to be very flexible. They're interested in making the solution work. They're interested in paying the attention, and they're likely to have these connected integrations and so on and so forth. Or if they don't have, they will fix it for you. And as a result, it's going to be a lower cost. It's going to be an early adopter mindset that allows them to bring in. Allow yourself, don't kill yourself for all the mistakes, but allow for some of the mistakes and put some guardrails. That means you are already building momentum in solving and adapting these innovative technologies and accelerating those results that you're driving, which is ultimately what you're looking at for the company's benefit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Raju and Ms. Ling. Next question, also for both Ms. Lim and Mr. Raju. Some companies have some doubt to move to cloud due to some security reason. Would you share your expert opinions about this? Ms. Lim, first.
I will give an example of my mother. Okay, she is always used as a case study. My mother she works for a very secure company. When they first moved to cloud, because my mom is my mom, she's old, okay? She's not very technologically savvy. I go home one day and then I see with horror, her password is stuck on her screen. I mean, it's at home because, it's okay, because we're at home, so this is not office. So I asked her, Mommy, what is this? She says, oh, my password, because I cannot remember my password. I said, Mommy, this is terrible. I think that is not a great example of how you should be managing your employees. Coming back to Raju's 3P process, the people, the product, and you can be very secure in your system, but when you meet somebody like my mom and you have a weakest link in your people, you will have a little bit of a challenge. So I told her, Mommy, no, this is terrible. The security is no good for you. You need to find a different way to remember your password. So that's fine. She says, okay, no problem. So I go back to my own place, and then about a couple of weeks later, I go visit her again. And then I come back and I see, I'm very happy, Mommy, that your password is no longer stuck on your computer with a Post-it. So how do you remember it? She said that, oh, I have increased my cyber security. I said, how? Now the password is underneath the keyboard. And I thought, okay, this is again not okay. I'm using this as an example just to tell you that cybersecurity is only as strong as your weakest link. I mean, yes, you can put in all sorts of systems, but you need to understand that for somebody like my mother, maybe a two-factor authentication she might still be able to work it. But in terms of all of the other aspects of cybersecurity, maybe you need to find a good calibration to bring your people up to speed so that when you move to the cloud and when there are cybersecurity considerations, that they know how to address it. That's one component of it. The second component, and I'll stop at the second component of it, is that a lot of the cybersecurity breaches that we see in the press are not because the the user, not because the system, the cloud system is broken, but rather because of poor user management, like my mother, or number two, poor configuration. Somebody has left a database unsecured. Somebody used the default settings and forgot to change it to a more secured setting because of whatever reason. So usually it is human error that prevents it. It's not the problem of the system. Like I said, I'll pause there, but again, lots of examples to share. It's not the cloud system that's insecure. It's people that's the problem. Raju.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody who wants to breach, it's got to be either through the systems, and now if it's an old system, like Ms. May has mentioned, it's like old one, and you don't have enough secure features attached to it 10 years ago. Sure, that's a problem, and you have to watch out for it. But bulk of it is really security through people. Either it's deliberate, or somebody smarter impersonating them and doing something associated with it by gaining passwords, etc. The way to look at that is assets are important. The company assets are important. You want to make sure your top line and bottom line are protected in the event, and therefore it's important to have a strategic view for the security as well. In your day-to-day engagement, those investments, paying to those attentions and making sure you're upgrading on a regular basis, because every time there is some extra thing that you do digitally, that means there's a digital footprint somewhere somebody can exploit. There's no two ways about it, right? There's something, you leave free money on the table, somebody will pick it up, and therefore it's, if you want to protect it, sure, you have to put in those aspects. So it's more like insurance, I would say. So you got to invest in that, so it takes care of you when something goes wrong, or prevents a lot of things from happening. Otherwise, you're leaving the company vulnerable to the overall thing. So if you bring that into the front and center of everything you do as a core part of it, so when you're designing something, you think of the security at that time. Okay, and then you invest in that and include that in the calculations of ROIs, and include that as a matter of fact. So now you're forced to think of what top line you need in order to do that. But if you do this as an afterthought, then that looks like an expense which you don't want to. Sandy, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you for your answers. For the last question, how would you think the cloud computing will impact further the digitization, especially in manufacturing industry? Ms. Lim?
I think that it has already impacted very greatly the areas in which we are, I think, more familiar with from an end user standpoint. From the consumer standpoint, just manufacturing is very, very much tied with logistics. And I think that due to the pandemic over the last 2 years and all of us being stuck at home and not being able to do much going out, I think that the logistics sector which is very intimately tied with manufacturing, has really been hard pressed to find different ways to optimize and innovative ways to resolve solutions. I think all of us know that we are in a supply delivery crunch right now with very real problems like canals being blocked because ships have blocked the way to go, and also flight delays and customs clearances are a little bit slower, again, due to the pandemic. I think that cloud computing has accelerated the availability and the ease in which people can now move and provision virtual machines, or just provision trial and error and testing on the cloud. That has accelerated a lot of people's, I think, appetite for moving to the cloud, and therefore more people are a little bit more adventurous to try different things. I think that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I think a lot of people are still moving their core systems onto the cloud, especially in a lot of the developing countries. But I do know that some of the more fast-moving guys are saying, hey, let's look at the analytics and let's look at AI and how we can gain more insight into all of this stuff that we're dumping into the cloud. And let's see what new tools, and that comes back to my innovation point. let's see what new tools our cloud providers or our own engineers have come up with to let us massage the data, connect the data, play around with the data to see if there can be more products or if there can be more people optimization involved. So I think that there is right now a lot of impact on the manufacturing sector. There will continue to be, for sure.
Thank you. Let me try to answer that. So when we look at manufacturing, obviously there's a significant amount of automation that's already happened thanks to cloud technologies. And it's going to further expand. It's a matter of how much you want to adapt and how quickly you want to adapt. So on one hand, you'll see the systems which are industry-specific systems, like your MES systems, right? It's common for factories these days to have very few number of people. We keep reading about that in papers and so on. So you have these Siemens and Rockwell Automation and ABB and all those kind of organizations which give you that machinery, the systems, and those sort of things. Now, as you make it work, you move on to the other side. You have a list of cloud providers on the other side. You got everyone talking about new technology, and then it can be confusing. But it's important to know that there are now different platform providers which are also based on cloud. So the cloud does not mean a typical Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, which are the big, big service providers. But there are a lot of other providers of solutions that are connecting the dots between what's going on in a Siemens automation system or ABB and other systems, and translating that into, with some subject matter expertise and a lot of other physics, mathematics related expertise built into it, and then connecting the dots with your cloud providers. As a result, you should expect things to get easier by the day, nimble and agile by the day, that allows you to do that. So that connection is very important, because in the early stages, if your organization is in the early stages of adopting, chances are you may not have it set up in an ideal manner. Therefore, there will be some manual stuff, and that has its own friction associated with it. But if you are getting into this, look for those connectivity, pieces, especially in your industry. If you're high-tech manufacturing, it's going to be slightly different from, say, chemical industry or a process manufacturing and those sort of things. So as it's further divided into what are the KPIs you will measure and so on and so forth. So it goes that way. But at a high level, look at that connecting piece between the industrial systems as well as the cloud, and how well that can be orchestrated in a manner that works out. So I think that's the next round that will happen with Industry 4.0. I've heard recently that if you look at some of the German car manufacturers, if you're in that kind of a space, for instance, let's say if Sandy, myself, and Ms. May are all the operators of a certain machine, and I'm operating it, but I'm on leave on a certain day, and let's say Sandy takes my position, then the system or the machine and the shop floor actually adapts to what Sandy's skills are, what Sandy's abilities are, and then puts forward to that. If it's smarter than this, then obviously there's a set of things that happen, and otherwise there are a set of things that happen. So what it does is it makes sure the adaptability of the organization to the human interface, that's where the connectivity is happening. That's where the improvement is happening. That's where innovation is happening to the constraints that show up from time to time. So eventually we all can work only 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And that helps everybody because of the advantages inherently associated with it. The mistakes will be less, and the outcomes will be like 10x or a force multiplier than what it used to be in the past. Sandy?
Thank you very much. And now we have one question from the audience. How can cloud computing, wait a minute, how can cloud computing help manufacturing companies during uncertainties? Would you please answer this? Ms. Lim?
I'm so uncertain about how to answer that question. So I'm hoping that cloud computing can help me also. I think that a lot of the uncertainty is a little bit scary because if you have uncertainties and dependencies which are not controllable, then no matter how much technology you have, there is no resolution for it. A couple of years ago, we had a chicken situation in Malaysia and Singapore. There weren't enough eggs coming into Singapore because there was a problem with, I think, the chicken population somewhere or other, and we didn't have enough eggs. So if you don't have enough eggs, you don't have enough eggs. No matter how much cloud computing I give you, you're not going to have enough eggs. That's a very base to the question. But here's some things which will help you. Okay, number one, I think that there are lots of risk management and projection software, and cloud technology can help with that to make sure that you can assess your risk and your in your supply chain. I won't lie to you, I'm not really sure because there are so many different industries that you could talk about in manufacturing that I can't narrow it down to one example. But in your supply chain, you may want to do a risk management. You can always put risk management projections. And if you have, the more data you have in the past, you can actually see historically whether or not a certain particular part, component, industry is going to give you problems, and you increase the risk factor there. You might want to start diversifying your supply chains to make sure that your risk is mitigated. So I would imagine that the analytics would be a lot better with cloud computing. That's how I would imagine what the risk is and uncertainty that the person asking the question is referring to. So thank you very much for the question. Mr. Raju, do you have other scenarios for uncertainty to throw?
Just like everything, we can have multiple points of view. Obviously, the uncertainty by itself does not define anything. It's the nature of the uncertainty you need to look at. Uncertainty comes in a lot of varieties and flavors. Okay, and then if it is a supply chain problem, for example, you figure it out on that part. If there are no eggs, then there are no eggs. Cloud is not going to give you eggs, that's for sure, right? So you can't say, hey, cloud, give me the eggs, right? But if the eggs are not able to reach from one place to the other, or you want to be able to tell when the eggs are arriving because of this, so that you can make it predictable, that is definitely possible. So this is possible when you look at first principles, right? You have to apply first principles, because in the end, something is broken, something was not planned, and therefore something is not happening as the way you intended it to be. Maybe a tire got punctured somewhere on the road, right? Things like that. So when you look at it, try looking at it on where exactly is the root cause of the problem that caused the uncertainty in your day-to-day engagement. And that needs to be fixed. If that's a technology related problem, if that's something that technology can fix, that's the weakest link, it's easy to fix, right? It's definitely easy to fix. But if it's not, then the next best thing is to make that uncertainty predictable so that people can take plan B actions, right? You wanted to eat eggs, but then you'll eat something else today. But I would rather tell you upfront. So the approach needs to be, how soon can I know that there is uncertainty or something else has gone wrong against the plan? So that is where you have these early warning systems, the red flags, and if one person in the company knows that red flag, how can you make sure the rest of the 10 people who will going forward use that information to do something about it? How quickly can you inform them? How easily can you inform them, or give any suggestions on how to fix it just in case somebody is new and so on? So it's a matter of making it predictable in cases where you cannot force the chicken to lay eggs, but everything else is okay. Tell someone else that it's going to take 3 more days to do it. That way you're still protecting the business, and then you can go fix whatever is the product outside of the cloud requirement that needs to be fixed.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we got another question from the audience.
People are paying attention.
How do we overcome losing visibility and control when transition operations to the cloud?
Sorry, say that again. What's the transition to the cloud? Sorry.
How do we overcome losing visibility and control when transition operations to the cloud.
Raju, do you want to take this?
Oh, yeah.
It's a control issues.
Okay.
So I work for
Who's
companies.
first?
Yeah, thanks. Acceldata is found on that premise that you need to see things clearly before they happen. Okay, so we call it observability, and it's similar to visibility that you're saying. So what happens is when you're moving, and I'll give you a couple of examples. There are many occasions where the customers have asked, these are customer quotations that I'm telling you. They said, look, we moved this stuff from on-premise that we used to run, and I used to run a few things at 45 minutes, whenever I do that. And now I moved to this cloud and it's taking me 4 hours. What's wrong with it? Okay, so that's one example. This is a real life. So sometimes you're doing it and you could not find out what is wrong. And as a result, if you're running 4 times the amount of time, then your probably cost savings are going down, significantly. That's number one. Some other companies have said, look, for this particular cloud vendor, I'm paying so much today, but in 3 years, I think I'll go to that level from that level, and I don't want that to happen because it'll impact my top line and bottom line. And there are a host of other examples in between. So what needs to happen is, whenever you're moving the systems, the number one thing you need to look for is the reliability. How do you establish the reliability of the data that you moved? How do you know the data moved from this to that, and those 1,000 rows of information moved into 1,000 rows, and it's not 990, where 10 of them got mixed? Because if that happens, then you're running around in circles to try and figure out what happened, and that generates additional delays and so on and so forth. In general, that's a waste of time for everybody, waste of resources and money, and then it ends up in the finger pointing, saying that's not my problem and that's not my problem. So how do you do that? There is technology today that you can say, I want this in this form and shape to go into that in that form of shape, and therefore you are in a position to get that information out irrespective of the technology you are on. And that can be deployed. It can be done in 1 or 2 weeks. That's number one. Second, while doing that, you should also look for what are the process changes to be done. There's no point in putting whatever inefficiencies you have on premise and moving it onto the cloud as is. You have to look for things. For example, on premise, for instance, in order to do a certain thing, you may be using 4 technologies because that's old technologies. Remember, 5 years ago, all the technologies didn't exist. So if all those 5 can become into a single technology there, or 2, for example, you have to look at that transformation also. And if you do that, then you are really benefiting from there. And just like Ms. May has said, the weakest link determines the strength of the chain. So you don't want the weak link from your on-prem world to go there, and there is now a total data reliability. So I keep going back to this 3 main tenets of data in the past. One is, data volumes are getting more complex and more volume all the time, and that's always true. It's going to be 10 times more next year than what it is today, probably more, who knows. And then business users always want more answers, more of everything else, but you want to do it in the small thing. But the third part is the reliability. Is the data that I'm seeing here reliable for me to use and make decisions? If you use that, and that's there because mistakes can be costly. Imagine this, you put wrong piece of data in a certain platform and the end user has no way to find out whether it's reliable, and then they're using it and using it and using it. That leaves them to like total cost, and of course it was made on bad data. So only when you finish looking at all the things, think of it like, you can't get a car with 1 tire less. You got to have all the 4 wheels of a car. Just because it's 3 wheels done, it's not a 75%. So it's a matter of getting everything minimum viable in a minimum viable form, at least, in order to make it, and therefore eliminate any bottlenecks that you had in your on-premise world, and therefore you will get what you're looking for. You're likely to get more what you're looking for in the cloud world.
Thank you very much. It is a great insight from Mr. Raju. Okay, now we are coming to the end of our session for the wrap up. So the conclusion of for this session is that cloud computing can be very helpful for the companies, and it has some drawbacks and some pros and cons. that we can address. Thank you very much for Mr. Raju and Ms. Lin. Back to you, Ms. Nikita.